"My dad traded me for a cigarette," said the 4-year-old beggar girl. But a millionaire went to her father and did something that shocked everyone. Central Square in Harmony Creek, Ohio, was bustling that Tuesday morning, filled with residents, going about their daily routines. Amongst the shadows of the old oak trees, a little figure drew attention, with the sadness in her big, expressive eyes. 6-year-old Isabella sat on the steps of the First Presbyterian Church, her simple clothes and messy curly hair highlighting her vulnerability as she timidly held out her hand to passers-by. "Please, spare a dime," she whispered with a fragile voice. "My daddy traded me for a cigarette." The sentence echoed through the square, hitting everyone who heard it right in the gut. Some stopped, rummaged through their pockets, and dropped a few coins into her small hands. Others simply lowered their eyes and quickened their pace, uncomfortable with the harsh reality the girl represented. Walt Thompson parked his pickup truck in front of the First National Bank and, as usual, walked across the square towards the branch. At 58 years old, the businessman was known throughout Harmony Creek as the owner of the largest furniture factory in the region, Thompson & Sons. His erect posture and decisive way of walking demonstrated the determined personality that had allowed him to build an empire from nothing. It was when he heard the childish voice repeating those devastating words that his steps faltered. Walt turned slowly, his eyes meeting the small figure of Isabella. For a moment that seemed eternal, he remained still, as if he had received an electric shock. "My daddy traded me for a cigarette," the girl repeated, unaware that her words had just awakened something deep and disturbing in the man's heart. Walt's hands trembled slightly as he approached. The girl looked up, revealing a sadness that shouldn't exist in someone so young. There was something in that look that instantly transported him to another time, to another childish face that he carried in his memory like a constant weight on his chest. "What's your name, little one?" Walt asked, crouching down to her height. "Isabella," she replied, with a shyness mixed with the natural distrust of someone who has learned early that the world isn't always kind. "And where's your family?" "I live with Grandma Connie. Daddy works at the garage, but—" The girl hesitated, as if the words were too difficult for her age. "He said I wasn't worth a pack of smokes." Walt felt something break inside him. 10 years ago, he had a daughter the same age as Isabella. 10 years ago, his life had meaning. 10 years ago, he was a different man before everything crumbled on a night he tried to forget every day. "Your father's wrong," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You're worth a whole lot more than that." Isabella tilted her head, confused by the intensity of those words coming from a stranger. Walt put his hand in his pocket and took out some bills, but something prevented him from simply giving the money and moving on. There was an inexplicable force pulling him towards the situation, as if fate were presenting a second chance that he didn't know if he deserved. "Where does your father work?" he asked. "At Joey's garage near the gas station." Walt knew the place. It was a small backyard garage where men without many options clung to whatever work they could find. He stood up slowly, his eyes still fixed on the girl. "I'm going to talk to him," Walt said, more to himself than to Isabella. "Are you going to yell at my daddy?" she asked, with a genuine fear in her voice. "No, honey, I'm going to try to help." But as he walked towards the garage, Walt knew that his definition of help might be very different from what anyone expected. The emptiness he had carried for 10 years had found a form, a face, a possibility of fulfillment. And when Walt Thompson made up his mind, nothing in the world could change it. Joey's garage reeked of oil and metal. At the back of the establishment, a thin man of about 35 years was struggling with a rusty part. Ronald "Ron" Silver's face was marked by fatigue and sleepless nights, and his hands trembled slightly, a sign that Walt recognized immediately. "You Isabella's father?" Walt asked bluntly. Ron looked up, surprised by the presence of the town's most important businessman in his modest garage. Yes, sir. Has something happened to her? She's in the square begging, saying you traded her for a cigarette. Ron's face contorted in a mixture of shame and irritation. She shouldn't be saying those things. She's just a kid. She doesn't understand. Understands enough to repeat what she hears at home, Walt interrupted, his voice loaded with judgment. A heavy silence settled between the two men. Ron lowered his eyes, unable to maintain eye contact with the man who represented everything he could never be. I need a worker at my factory, Walt said suddenly. Someone for the finishing department. Steady pay, full benefits. Ron blinked several times, thinking he had misheard. Sir? But there's one condition, Walt continued, his eyes turning cold as steel. You quit drinking completely, and you prove that you can take care of your daughter the way she deserves. The proposal hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Ron knew that his reputation as a drinker was no secret to anyone in the small town. But he also knew that this was an opportunity that would never come again. Why would you do this for me? Ron asked suspiciously. Walt didn't answer immediately. His eyes wandered to some distant point, as if reliving a painful memory. Let's just say I believe in second chances, he said finally. But there was something in his tone that suggested motivations much more complex than simple charity. Ron extended his hand, sealing an agreement that neither of them fully understood at that moment. But as they shook hands, a strange feeling took over both of them, as if they were starting something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple, working relationship. What neither of them knew was that this handshake had just started a series of events that would forever transform the lives of everyone involved, and that the seemingly innocent phrase of a 6-year-old girl had awakened forces that would soon completely spiral out of control. 3 weeks had passed since the encounter at the garage, and Ron's life had changed surprisingly. Every day, at 7 o'clock sharp, he passed through the gates of Thompson & Sons Furniture, still in disbelief at his new reality. The work was hard, but honest, and for the first time in years, he received a salary that allowed him to dream of a better life for Isabella. The small house that Walt had secured for them in the East End neighborhood was simple, but it represented an unattainable luxury until then. 2 small rooms, a working bathroom, and a kitchen where Connie prepared meals with the pride of someone who finally had enough ingredients to vary the menu. "Grandma, are we having meat again today?" Isabella asked, swinging her legs on the chair as she watched her grandmother stir a steaming pot. "Yes, my darling. And rice, and beans, and even some veggies," replied 72-year-old Connie, with a smile that couldn't completely hide the worry in her tired eyes. The elderly woman watched Ron come home from work every day, washed his clothes, prepared his food, but something in her experienced grandmother's heart alerted her. There was a tension in the air that she couldn't explain, as if they were living in a bubble that could burst at any moment. Ron entered the house that afternoon, carrying a bag with fresh bread from the bakery. Since he had started working at the factory, he made a point of bringing small surprises home, trying to make up for years of emotional absence. "Daddy!" Isabella ran to hug him, and he lifted her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed in that crystalline way that made his heart clench with mixed guilt and love. "How was school today, Princess? Miss Sarah said I'm reading really well, and that next week we're doing a presentation about family." Ron exchanged a quick glance with Connie. The school was another gift from Walt, a spot at the best school in Harmony Creek, where the kids wore nice uniforms and had access to new books. Another bill that the businessman had taken on without clearly explaining his motivations. "That's great, honey. You're going to be the smartest in the class." But while he was talking to Isabella, Ron couldn't shake off the strange feeling that had been accompanying him in recent days. During work, he noticed that Walt watched him more often than would be normal for a common employer. There was something in the way the businessman looked at him, as if he were studying every movement, every reaction, every word. At the factory, the other employees whispered about the special treatment that Ron received. Jake, the longest-serving supervisor, had made some acidic comments about favorites that did not go unnoticed. "Ron, you have a meeting with the boss tomorrow morning," Jake informed him that afternoon, with a tone that mixed curiosity and suspicion. "Meeting? About what?" "Don't know. He just said for you to be in his office at 8 o'clock sharp." That night, Ron barely managed to sleep. He tossed and turned in the small bed, trying to imagine what Walt could want. Would it be a promotion? A complaint about his work? Or something much worse? The next morning, he knocked on the door of Walt's office exactly at 8 o'clock. The office was impressive, with noble wood furniture that reflected the businessman's success. Behind the desk, Walt waited for him with a serious expression. "Have a seat, Ron." "Is something wrong, sir? Isn't my work good?" Walt got up and walked to the window that overlooked the factory yard. "Your work is excellent, but I need to talk to you about other matters." "What kind of matters?" "About Isabella, about your responsibility as a father." Ron felt his stomach tighten. "I'm taking good care of her, sir. The house is in order. She's going to school." "I know," Walt interrupted, turning to face him, "but I want to make sure that this will continue, so I need to be more present in the situation." "How so present?" Walt returned to his chair and opened a drawer, taking out some papers. "I will visit your home regularly. I want to closely monitor how Isabella is being cared for. It's a matter of guarantee." "Guarantee of what?" "That my investment in you is worth it." The word investment echoed in Ron's mind like an alarm. For the first time since accepting the job, he understood that he might have gotten himself into something much more complicated than he had imagined. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate everything you've done for us, but I don't understand why you need to." "Because I want the best for that girl," Walt cut him off, his voice taking on a harsher tone, "and I will make sure she has it, no matter what it takes." There was something in the way he said, "no matter what it takes," that made Ron feel a chill down his spine. For the first time, he questioned whether that miraculous opportunity didn't have a much higher price than he had imagined. "Can I leave now?" Ron asked, trying to maintain his composure. "You can, but remember, I'll be watching. Any slip-up, any relapse, anything that harms Isabella, and our deal is off immediately." Ron left the room with wobbly legs. As he walked back to his workstation, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just been threatened, disguised as protection. That afternoon, he arrived home quieter than usual. Connie immediately noticed that something was wrong. "What's the matter, son?" "Nothing, Grandma Connie. Just tired from work." But when Isabella ran to hug him, as she always did, Ron held her tighter than usual, as if sensing that something threatened to take her away from him. Outside the house, hidden behind a tree on the street, Walt watched the scene through the window. In his hands, he held a small, faded photograph of a girl with curly hair and an angelic smile. A girl who would be the same age as Isabella today if she were still alive. "Forgive me, my daughter," he whispered to the photograph, "but I can't let another child suffer as you suffered." And as he walked back to his car, Walt was already planning his next visit. Because for him, this wasn't just about helping a needy family. It was about a second chance that fate had placed in his path, and he wouldn't allow anything or anyone to take it away from him. In the simple house in the East End neighborhood, Connie prepared dinner with a growing feeling of unease. Her years of life had taught her to recognize when storms were approaching, even when the sky still seemed clear. 2 months had passed since the conversation at the factory, and Walt's visits to the house in the East End neighborhood had become more frequent. He always showed up with a plausible excuse, checking if the house needed repairs, bringing toys for Isabella, or simply dropping by to see how things were. That Saturday afternoon, Walt arrived carrying a new doll for Isabella. The girl ran to greet him with a radiant smile that made the businessman's heart clench in a strange and intense way. "Grandpa Walt," she shouted, using the affectionate nickname that had been born naturally. "I brought you a surprise, princess," he said, handing her the doll wrapped in colored paper. Ron watched the scene from the kitchen, a growing irritation taking over him. In recent days, Isabella had talked more about Walt than about anyone else. The businessman had become a constant presence in the girl's life, and that bothered him deeply. "Mr. Thompson, can I talk to you?" Ron said, trying to maintain forced politeness. "Of course. Isabella, how about playing outside with your a doll?" The girl ran out, radiant, leaving the two men alone in the small room. Connie, who was knitting in her rocking chair, pretended not to pay attention, but her ears were attentive to every word. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate all your help, but I think your visits are getting too frequent," Ron began, choosing his words carefully. "Frequent? I don't see a problem with visiting friends. It's just Isabella's getting too used to you being around, and I'm her dad." Walt stood up slowly, his expression hardening. "Dad? A dad who let her beg for change in the square. I've changed. You yourself said I've changed." "For now," Walt replied, his voice loaded with veiled threat. "But what if you go back to drinking? What if you decide being a father is too hard? Who's going to protect Isabella then?" Ron felt the anger rising, but before he could answer, Connie's voice cut through the air. "Enough." The two men turned to the elderly woman, surprised by the firmness in her voice. "You two are arguing about a child as if she were an object. That's not right. Grandma Connie, you don't understand," Walt began. "I understand more than you imagine." She cut him off, rising from her chair with difficulty. "And I think it's time you both knew the truth." A heavy silence filled the room. Connie walked to an old piece of furniture and pulled out a shoebox, yellowed with age. "Mr. Thompson, you want to protect Isabella so much, but you don't even know who she really is." "What do you mean?" Walt asked, a strange feeling taking over him. "Ron isn't Isabella's biological father." The words landed like a bomb in the room. Ron paled, and Walt stood completely still. "What?" Ron whispered. "My biological granddaughter is named Letitia. She dated Ron for 2 years. They had Isabella. But when the girl turned 2, Letitia ran away from home one night and never came back." Connie opened the box, revealing yellowed letters and some photographs. Ron took on the fatherhood because he loved Letitia and because he couldn't abandon a child. But biologically, he's not Isabella's father. Walt sat heavily in the chair, processing the information. His whole plan, his whole strategy to test Ron as a father had been based on a lie. "Why did you never tell me this?" Ron asked, his voice choked. "Because you were the only man who didn't abandon my granddaughter when things got tough. You're her father in the only sense that matters, in your heart." "And where is this Letitia now?" Walt asked, his mind working quickly. "We don't know. She was only 18 when she ran away. She was scared, confused. She said she was going to Columbus to look for work, but we never heard from her again." Ron put his face in his hands. "All these years I thought that one day she would come back for Isabella. And maybe she will," Connie said softly. "Mothers don't forget their children." At that moment, they heard Isabella's cheerful voice from the backyard, playing with her new doll. The innocent sound contrasted drastically with the tension that had settled in the room. "This changes everything," Walt murmured. "Changes what?" Connie asked, watching him intently. My responsibility to her." "Your responsibility?" Ron repeated, raising his eyes. "What responsibility? She's not your granddaughter." Walt stood up abruptly. "I've invested time, money, energy in this situation. I can't simply..." Can't what? Connie cut him off, her voice taking on a stern tone that neither of them had heard before. Can't stop treating a child like property. I don't treat her like property. Then why do you keep talking about investment? Why do you act as if Isabella is your project? Walt opened his mouth to answer, but the words didn't come out. For the first time since he had met Isabella, he was forced to confront his own motivations. I just want what's best for her, he said finally, but his voice sounded less convincing than before. What's best for her, Connie repeated, or what's best for you? The question hung in the air like an accusation. At that moment, the door opened and Isabella ran in, her doll in her arms. Grandma, can I have some water? Sure, honey. Isabella ran to the kitchen, and the three adults watched her in silence. There was an innocence in her that contrasted with the complexity of the feelings and secrets that surrounded her. She needs to know the truth about her mother, Connie said when Isabella was out of sight. No! Ron and Walt protested at the same time. She's too young, Ron continued, and it might confuse her, Walt added. Connie looked at the two men with an expression that mixed sadness and disappointment. You two are so worried about protecting your own interests that you've forgotten to think about what's best for her for real. Grandma Connie, I love Isabella as if she were my biological daughter, Ron said desperately, and I want to give her the opportunities she deserves, Walt added. But you're doing it by fighting each other, creating tension in the house, using her as a trophy in a dispute she doesn't even know exists. The truth of Connie's words hit the two men like slaps in the face. For a moment, the silence was broken only by the sound of the faucet in the kitchen and Isabella's cheerful voice, talking to her doll. What do you think would happen if Letitia came back today? Connie asked, her voice low but penetrating. Ron and Walt looked at each other, and for the first time, both realized that they had no answer to that question, and that maybe they weren't prepared to face that possibility. Outside, the wind swayed the trees of the small street, as if sensing that even greater changes were to come. The weeks following Connie's revelation brought an almost palpable tension to the house in the East End neighborhood. Ron walked around the house like a haunted man, constantly questioning his rights as a non-biological father. Walt, in turn, intensified his visits, as if the discovery had further legitimized his presence in Isabella's life. The girl, oblivious to the complexities of the adults around her, continued her routine of school and play, but Connie noticed small changes in her behavior. Isabella had started asking questions about her mother more often. "Grandma, why did my mommy leave?" she asked one afternoon, while helping Connie fold clothes. "Sometimes people need to leave to find themselves." "Honey?" the elderly woman replied, choosing her words carefully. "But will she come back?" Connie hesitated, her eyes filling with tears that she tried to hide. "I don't know, my love. But if she comes back, she'll be very happy to see how you've grown." That same afternoon, Walt arrived with more gifts, this time a small bike with training wheels. Isabella's joy at seeing the gift made his heart race in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Now you can ride all the way down the street," he said, helping her onto the bike. Ron watched from the window, his hands clenched into fists. Walt's generosity was becoming oppressive, as if each gift was a way of marking territory. "Daddy! Daddy, come see!" Isabella shouted, pedaling awkwardly through the yard. "Coming, princess," he replied, but there was a bitterness in his voice that he couldn't hide. When he went out to the yard, he found Walt teaching Isabella how to balance the bike, his big hands guiding her small hands on the handlebars. The scene was touching, but for Ron, it seemed like an invasion. "Mr. Thompson, can I talk to you?" he said, trying to keep calm. "Sure. Isabella, keep pedaling slowly." The two men moved away to a corner of the yard. "This needs to stop," Ron said, his voice tense. "What?" These constant gifts, these daily visits, it's messing with her head. I'm just being kind to a child who deserves affection. She already has affection. She has me. She has Grandma Connie. Walt turned to face him completely. What? If that's not enough? What do you mean? What if she needs more? Financial stability, opportunities, a future that you can't give? Walt's words hit Ron like punches. It was true that even with his job at the factory, they were living on the edge. It was true that Isabella deserved more than they could offer. I know I'm not rich, Ron said, his voice choked, but I love her as if she were my blood daughter. Love doesn't pay for private school, doesn't pay for health insurance, doesn't guarantee a future. What are you suggesting? Walt took a deep breath, as if preparing for something important. That you let me adopt Isabella officially. The silence that followed was deafening. Ron turned pale, as if he had been slapped. What? I can give her everything she needs, quality education, travel, experiences that will shape her character. You can continue being part of her life, but as what? As the employee who takes care of your adopted daughter? That's not how I'm thinking. Then how are you thinking? Walt hesitated, and in that hesitation Ron saw the naked truth. You want to replace the daughter you lost, Ron said, his voice loaded with painful understanding. That has nothing to do with, it has everything to do with it. You're not interested in helping Isabella. You're interested in healing your own pain. At that moment they heard a noise at the front of the house. It was Connie talking to someone at the door. Her voice sounded agitated, surprised. My God! Leticia! Ron and Walt looked at each other, the blood draining from both their faces. They ran to the front of the house, where they found Connie hugging a young woman with brown hair and eyes red from crying. Leticia had returned. At 28 years old, she carried on her face the marks of someone who had faced difficult battles. Her simple but clean clothes suggested that she'd managed to stabilize herself, but there was a fragility in her posture that indicated how much it had cost her to get there. Mom, I heard Isabella was okay, that you were... Her voice failed as she saw Ron standing in the doorway. Leticia, he said, his voice just a whisper. Ron, the reunion was loaded with years of pain, guilt, and unresolved love. Walt watched the scene with an expression that mixed shock and something that looked like panic. Where is she? Leticia asked, her hands trembling. Where is my daughter? At that exact moment, Isabella appeared in the yard, still riding her new bike. Seeing the strange woman talking to her grandmother, she pedaled slowly towards them, curious. Who are you? Isabella asked, with the frankness typical of children. Leticia fell to her knees, tears streaming freely down her face. I'm your mother, my darling. Isabella looked at Leticia, then at Ron, then at Connie, trying to process that information. My mother? But my daddy said my mommy went on a trip. I traveled, Leticia said, reaching out hesitantly. But now I'm back to stay with you. Forever? If you want me to. Ron felt the world crumbling around him. Walt was motionless like a statue, watching the meeting that had just destroyed all his plans. I have a new bike, Isabella said, trying to process the situation in the only way she knew. Grandpa Walt gave it to me. Leticia looked at Walt for the first time, noticing his presence. And who is this man? The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Connie looked at Walt, then at Ron, realizing that the situation had become much more complicated than any of them could have imagined. It's a long story, Connie said finally. I have time, Leticia replied, her voice gaining a firmness that hadn't been there before. I have all the time in the world to understand what happened in my daughter's life while I was gone. And at that moment, everyone realized that Leticia's return wasn't just the return of a mother. It was the beginning of a battle that would define Isabella's future, and test the limits of the love, selfishness, and sacrifice of each of them. The 3 days following Leticia's return were the most tense that the small house in the East End neighborhood had ever witnessed. The young mother had settled on the living room couch, insisting that she wouldn't leave until she resolved the situation with her daughter. Isabella, confused by so many changes, alternated between the natural curiosity for this mother who had appeared and the attachment to the adults she knew as family. Walt hadn't returned since the day of the reunion, but Ron knew he was planning something. The businessman wasn't a man to accept defeat easily, and Leticia's arrival represented a direct threat to his plans. "Tell me about her school," Leticia said one morning, while preparing Isabella's breakfast with the dedication of someone trying to make up for lost years. "She studies at St. Teresa's School downtown," Ron replied, watching carefully how Leticia interacted with her daughter. "It's one of the best in the city." "Who pays?" The question cut through the air like a knife. Ron hesitated, knowing that the answer would reveal much more than he wanted. "Mr. Thompson, he's been helping the family a lot." Leticia stopped stirring the eggs in the pan, turning slowly to face him. "Why?" "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it. I want to understand why a stranger is funding my daughter's education." Connie, who was knitting silently in the living room, sighed deeply. "Just tell her, Ron. She needs to know." Reluctantly, Ron began to explain about the meeting in the square, the job offer, Walt's constant visits. The more he spoke, the more Leticia's face closed in an expression of growing concern. "He wants to adopt Isabella?" she asked when Ron finished telling her about the conversation in the yard. "That's what he suggested." "And you?" "What did you answer?" "That I would never allow that." Leticia approached Ron, her eyes shining with an intensity that he hadn't seen in years. "Ron, I made a lot of mistakes. I ran away when I should have stayed. I abandoned my daughter when she needed me most, but now I'm here, and I won't let anyone take her from me again." "Leticia, I never tried to take her from you. When you left—" "I know." She lowered her eyes, the guilt weighing on her shoulders. "I know you took care of her when I couldn't, and I'm grateful for that. But now it's different." "Different how?" "Now I have a steady job in Columbus. I've been working at a clothing store for 2 years. I have a small but my own apartment. I can take care of her." The revelation hit Ron like a punch to the stomach. "You want to take her away?" "I want to give her the life she always deserved to have had. With me, her real mother." At that moment, Isabella entered the kitchen, dressed for school, unaware of the conversation that was defining her future. "Daddy, is it time to go yet?" Ron looked at the girl he had raised as his daughter, then at Leticia, who watched her with a mixture of love and pain. "We're going, Princess." But when they left for school, Leticia accompanied them, and it was there at the gate of St. Teresa School that they found Walt waiting. The businessman was leaning against his pickup truck with an expression that mixed determination and something that looked like despair. Seeing Leticia, his eyes narrowed. "We need to talk," he said, addressing the 3 adults. "We have nothing to talk about," Leticia replied firmly. "Yes, we do. About Isabella's future. Her future is with me. I'm her mother, a mother who abandoned her for 4 years." Walt's words were like poisoned arrows. Leticia paled but maintained her posture. "I didn't abandon her. I ran away, left a 2-year-old child without explanation. You don't know what I went through." "It doesn't matter what you went through. What matters is that Isabella stayed." Ron tried to intervene. "Mr. Thompson, please." "Shut up, Ron. You have no right over her either." The coldness in Walt's voice chilled everyone's blood. It was as if the benefactor's mask had finally fallen, revealing something much darker underneath. "How dare you talk like that?" Letitia exploded. "Who do you think you are? I'm someone who can give Isabella everything she deserves. Education, trips, opportunities that you'll never be able to offer. Money isn't everything, isn't it? Then why was she begging for change in the square when I found her?" The silence that followed was devastating. Isabella, who was playing near the school gate, noticed the tension and approached timidly. "Why are you fighting?" she asked, her voice small and scared. The three adults looked at the girl, each seeing something different in her. Letitia saw the daughter she needed to recover, Ron saw the daughter of his heart he didn't want to lose, and Walt saw the second chance he believed he deserved. "We're not fighting, honey," Letitia lied, forcing a smile. "Yes, you are. Everyone gets mad when they talk about me." The girl's innocent observation cut deep into the hearts of the three. Walt crouched down, getting to Isabella's height. "Princess, sometimes adults argue because they care about you very much. But I don't want you to argue. I want everyone to be friends." At that moment, the school bell rang, and the children began to enter. Isabella hesitated, looking at the three adults. "Are you going to be here when I get out?" "We will," Ron promised. "All of you?" The three looked at each other, knowing that it was a promise they might not be able to keep. "All of us," Walt lied. Isabella entered the school, and when she disappeared from view, the tension exploded again. "I'm going to file a lawsuit to have custody of her," Walt declared. "On what grounds?" Letitia countered. "On the grounds of someone who invested in her life when her own mother abandoned her. I came back. Too late." Ron watched the confrontation between the two, feeling helpless. Neither of them was asking what he wanted, what he felt. For them, he was just an obstacle between Isabella and their respective goals. "What if I don't let you?" Letitia asked, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "You don't have a choice," Walt replied, taking an envelope from inside the pickup truck. "My lawyers have already prepared the paperwork. Child abandonment, parental neglect, financial instability. You don't stand a chance against me." Letitia took the papers with trembling hands, her eyes filling with tears as she read. "You can't do this." "I can and I will. Unless what? Unless you disappear again, voluntarily, leave Isabella with someone who can really take care of her." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. Letitia looked at Ron, seeking support, but found only a man as scared and lost as she was. "I need time to think," she said finally. "You have until tomorrow," Walt replied, getting into the pickup truck. "After that, I'll let my lawyers handle it." As the businessman drove away, Letitia fell to her knees in the middle of the sidewalk, the papers scattered around her. Ron helped her up, and for the first time in years, they hugged each other, not as ex-lovers, but as two people who loved the same child and didn't know how to protect her. The night at the house in the East End neighborhood seemed endless. Letitia had spent hours pacing the small room, the lawsuit papers scattered on the table, like evidence of a sentence already handed down. Connie, visibly upset by the tension of the past few days, had been taken to the hospital with a high blood pressure crisis, leaving Ron, Letitia, and Isabella alone to face the approaching storm. "Is Grandma going to be okay?" Isabella asked, for the 10th time, curled up in Letitia's lap on the couch. "Yes, honey. She just needs to rest a little," Letitia replied, stroking her daughter's curly hair. It was strange how that simple gesture seemed natural, as if the 4 years of separation were just a nightmare that had finally ended. But reality imposed itself through the papers on the table and the deadline that was running out. Ron entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee, his eyes red from a sleepless night. The doctor said she can be discharged tomorrow, but she needs absolute rest, he informed, sitting in the chair that had been Connie's. Tomorrow, Letitia repeated, the word loaded with meaning. It was the deadline that Walt had given for her decision. Isabella had fallen asleep in her mother's lap, and Letitia carefully carried her to the bedroom. When she returned, she found Ron going through the lawsuit papers, his expression a mixture of anger and despair. "He has everything planned," Ron murmured. "Every argument, every piece of evidence, as if he had studied our life to find the weaknesses." "Because that's exactly what he did," Letitia replied, sitting down next to him. "From the first day he met Isabella, he was planning this." "But why? What does he gain by taking a child from her own family?" Letitia was silent for a moment, observing the photograph of Isabella on the shelf. "Have you ever asked about his daughter, the one who died?" "I asked Jake from the factory once. He said it was a car accident about 10 years ago. That she had run away from home and crashed the car trying to get back. What if there's more to the story?" Before Ron could answer, they heard footsteps on the porch. It was almost midnight, too late for normal visits. Ron went to the window and saw a familiar figure. It was Anthony, the oldest neighbor on the street, who had been Connie's friend for decades. "Mr. Anthony, what are you doing here at this hour?" The elderly man entered, carrying an old cardboard box. "Ron, my son, I heard Grandma Connie wasn't feeling well, and I also heard about the problems with this businessman." "How did you hear?" "Harmony Creek is a small town. Everyone already knows that Walt Thompson wants to adopt Isabella." Anthony turned to Letitia. "And you must be the girl's mother. Grandma Connie always talked about you." Letitia nodded, curious about the box the man was carrying. "I came here because Grandma Connie asked me to keep this a few months ago, said that if anyone ever tried to take Isabella from the family, I should show what's in here." Anthony placed the box on the table, pushing the lawsuit papers aside. "She said Walt had secrets and that one day those secrets might be important." With trembling hands, Ron opened the box. Inside, there were newspaper clippings, old photographs, and, at the bottom, a sealed envelope with the name Connie written in childish handwriting. "What is this?" Letitia asked, picking up one of the newspaper clippings. The article was from 10 years ago, with the headline, "Businessman's Daughter Dies in Highway Accident." The photograph showed a girl with curly hair and a sweet smile, eerily similar to Isabella. "My God," Letitia whispered. Ron picked up another clipping, this one with more details about the accident. "Mariana Thompson, 8, died early this morning after losing control of the vehicle she was driving without authorization." "An 8-year-old driving?" Letitia interrupted, incredulous. Anthony sighed heavily. "Tell her the rest, my son." Ron continued reading. The girl had run away from home after an argument with her father and was trying to return when the accident happened. In the car, a letter addressed to Mrs. Connie Silver, a resident of the East End neighborhood, was found. The silence that followed was deafening. Letitia picked up the sealed envelope, her hands trembling. "Grandma Connie never opened it?" she asked. "Said she didn't have the courage," Anthony replied. "But now I think you need to know what's written." Carefully, Letitia opened the old envelope. Inside, there was a sheet of childish paper with a careful child's handwriting. "Dear Mrs. Connie, Daddy said I can't visit the little girl you take care of anymore. He said she's not our family and that I'm wasting my time, but I like her. She's tiny and doesn't have a mom, just like I don't have one. Daddy gets very angry when I talk about her, but I wanted to help. I have lots of toys and she doesn't have any. Can I give her some? I promise Daddy won't find out. I just wanted her to be my little sister. Can you take care of both of us? With love, Mariana." Tears streamed down Letitia's face as she read the letter aloud. Ron was pale, processing the implications of that revelation. Isabella. Walt already knew Isabella before she was born? he murmured. Anthony nodded gravely. Grandma Connie told me she took care of an abandoned child she found at the church when Letitia was a teenager, a baby that someone left there. Mariana had seen the child and fallen in love with her, visited her secretly from her father. "But that child," Letitia began. "Was you," Anthony completed. "Connie raised you as her granddaughter, but you weren't biologically family. When you grew up and had Isabella, Grandma Connie saw in her the same child that Mariana had loved." The truth hit everyone like a hurricane. Walt wasn't trying to replace his dead daughter with a random child. He was trying to fulfill Mariana's last wish in a distorted and selfish way. "He killed his own daughter," Ron said, his voice loaded with horror. "Argued with her, kicked her out of the house, and that caused the accident. And now he wants to save Isabella to ease his own guilt," Letitia completed. At that moment, they heard a knock on the door. It was Walt, who had arrived for the final conversation. But when he entered the room and saw the papers scattered, the letter in Letitia's hands, and the expressions of those present, he knew immediately that his past had been discovered. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Your daughter wrote this letter before she died," Letitia said, rising to face him. "She wanted to help an abandoned child, but you forbade her, and when she tried to disobey you—" "Shut up," Walt exploded. "You don't know anything. I know that you killed your own daughter with your anger and selfishness, and now you want to do the same thing with Isabella." Walt staggered, as if he had been punched. For a moment, the mask of successful businessman fell completely, revealing a man shattered by guilt. I just wanted to give her what Mariana wanted to give. I wanted to..." "Wanted what?" "To buy the forgiveness of your dead daughter using another child." Letitia's words echoed through the small room. Walt sat heavily in the chair, the weight of 10 years of guilt finally collapsing on him. "She was trying to come home to give me the letter," he whispered. "The police said she was crying when she got in the car, that she was sorry for having argued with me." "And you? Were you sorry too?" Walt raised his eyes, and for the first time, Letitia saw not the powerful businessman, but a broken father. Every day for the last 10 years. "Then honor her memory for real," Letitia said, her voice softening. "Let Isabella be happy with those who truly love her. That's what Mariana wanted, that a child be cared for and loved, not possessed." Walt was silent for long minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was choked. "I withdrew the lawsuit this morning." "What?" "When I saw Isabella at school yesterday, I saw how she looked at you. I saw true love. And I realized that I was doing exactly what I did with Mariana, trying to control instead of love." Ron and Letitia looked at each other, barely believing what they were hearing. "I will continue to help financially," Walt continued. "The school, the health insurance, everything she needs. But as a friend of the family, not as someone who wants to own her." At that moment, Isabella appeared in the room, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Why are you crying?" she asked, confused. Letitia picked her up, hugging her tightly. "Because sometimes adults cry when they get very happy, honey. And are you happy?" "We are," Ron replied, approaching to hug the two. "Very happy." Walt stood up slowly, heading towards the door. "Isabella," he called softly. "Yes, Grandpa Walt, you'll always be very special to me, like your mom and dad. You are a real family. Aren't you going to fight with them anymore?" "Never again," he promised. "And when your Grandma Connie gets out of the hospital, we'll all take care of her. Together, how about that?" Isabella smiled, and in that smile everyone saw hope. 6 months later, the house in the East End neighborhood had transformed into a true home. Connie, recovered and wiser than ever, knitted on the porch while watching Isabella play in the yard. Letitia had gotten a job at Walt's store, who turned out to be a very different man, when he wasn't consumed by guilt. Ron continued to work at the factory, but now as a supervisor, a promotion he had earned on his own merit. And Isabella? Isabella grew up surrounded by 3 adults who had learned that true love doesn't possess, but liberates. That family isn't defined by blood, but by choice, and that sometimes second chances come disguised as the most unlikely situations. In the drawer in Connie's room, kept with care, was Mariana's letter, a reminder that a child's love can be the most powerful force in the world, capable of transforming even the most wounded hearts.